Yanze Khenpo Sodargye Doner Molam Khenpo Ngakya Bangar Dangon Zanto Shirmurdo Tomba Dikji Janla Gi Shamsar Nachar Zergi Jagamsa Jawar Tiki Jano Yila Jimmy Benzo Zhang Lang Sorande Gurti Toban Pora Shinjilo.
Profound and subtle Dharma is rarely encountered in eons. Now we hear and follow it. May we realize the Tathagata's meaning. To liberate beings, please generate bodhicitta before teaching. Today we will continue studying the Sigalovada Sutra. Next week it will also be held on Wednesday. The class for next week will be precisely the same as it was previously. This includes the profound Vimalakirti Sutra, the auspicious Sigalovada Sutra, and various other esoteric teachings. Regarding our specific focus, the Sigalovada Sutra, it holds a particularly significant place and will be discussed in detail. I have already explained some of the earlier content to everyone in detail. Mainly, we thoroughly discussed the four fundamental kinds of bonds. That is, killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, and lying. We must completely eliminate these four distinct kinds of bonds and resolutely refrain from committing these four evil deeds: greed, anger, ignorance, and fearfulness. This has already been expounded upon in our preceding discourse. If one does not commit these four evil deeds, then their reputation and their accumulated merit will increase day by day, much like the waxing moon. While this particular sutra may appear relatively simple and lack any especially challenging or obscure concepts at first glance, there shouldn't be anything particularly difficult to understand, but in fact its content is very meaningful. This is particularly relevant because we are currently engaged in the continuous promotion of a Buddhism for daily life to everyone. This is because life itself is something that no one can ever be truly separated from. Regardless of whether one is a monastic or a layperson, everyone needs to survive, everyone needs to remain alive, therefore in the process of sustaining one's life and simply existing. If we want to live, if the spirit of Buddhism is absent, a significant element is missing from that existence. Of course, that's also indeed quite possible. Everyone can absolutely survive in their own different ways, especially now in our era of globalization, or in such a wonderfully diverse and truly multicultural world. Everyone inherently has the profound freedom to choose different and unique ways to live their lives within this vast world. If there are some individuals who deeply hold faith in the principles of Buddhism, the question of how certain tenets of Buddhism can be effectively adapted to our contemporary way of life is an issue that is truly worthy of in-depth discussion and contemplation among all of us. This is a topic that we have been actively exploring and engaging with in our recent dialogues and interactions with everyone. We have also provided some helpful and accessible platforms. During the discussion sessions, we let everyone either talk about the content of that day or explain based on some of the profound and insightful Buddhist teachings we've extensively covered and discussed in detail before, to fully explain how the principles of Buddhism apply to our everyday lives. In the past couple of days, I've noticed that some people drew the topic of Buddhism in daily life, and their presentations were actually quite good and well received. It should be seamlessly integrated into our daily lives and routines, and also take our everyday real-life situations and relevant factors into careful consideration. Yesterday, a specific individual engaged in a conversation about a particular subject. This discussion which took place involved someone talking about something that was brought up. How did they put it exactly? It's perfectly okay if I don't explicitly mention it, so as not to waste any time. But the way they spoke was very down to earth, and a great many people truly enjoyed listening to it. Actually, this is something that we profoundly need, in that as everyone is continuously learning, we must discover how to effectively apply these fundamental principles in our complex and ever-evolving everyday world. Some parts are extremely profound and truly unfathomable, which can in many cases be readily applied in our actual practice. However, they are very difficult to apply in our daily lives and everyday routines. However, there is a lot of content that can be fully applied in our everyday world. When we put it into practice, it brings a great deal of convenience and significant benefit to both ourselves and others in our daily lives. That's precisely why we also diligently provide everyone with comprehensive teachings on practical Buddhism in daily life, profound meditation techniques, and various other similar and related topics, earnestly hoping that Buddhists everywhere won't just treat them as something to be ignored, as if once they're said, they're gone with the wind. There's no impression left at all. Not even a trace remains. Here I am, earnestly and repeatedly explaining these things, but if in the end no one pays attention, then I can value them myself. But after all, the power of one person is limited. So if everyone starts to take it seriously, I think in a certain sense at present this should be quite suitable. As for myself, although I'm not especially well read or learned, over the past 30 or 40 years, I've also traveled extensively to various different places and diligently studied many diverse religions, as well as various different sects and their distinct practices. In particular, when it comes to both the exoteric and esoteric schools of Buddhism, I should say I've given them a lot of serious thought. After reflecting on these things, what I share with everyone might sometimes sound like nonsense, but perhaps some of it could be genuinely inspiring, or at the very least possess some value. Whether we are discussing the profound Buddhist teachings that offer practical guidance for daily life, or delving into the Buddha's own words as recorded in the revered Sigalovada Sutra. In fact, some of the content in these teachings might feel to us a bit outdated, somewhat ancient, as if it doesn't quite seamlessly integrate with many aspects of contemporary modern life, and consequently, it cannot be fully adapted to its current demands and rapid changes. However, if we take the time to think about it very carefully, actually the content here is truly and profoundly very forward-looking, remarkably insightful, and highly relevant to our contemporary times. The timeless and profound words of the Buddha, spoken from over 2,500 years ago, may still, for people living in the modern 21st century, offer invaluable guidance and wisdom when we look back at history or look ahead to the future, or when we observe the stark realities of modern life. The noble people that the Buddha spoke of in the past, nowadays, it truly seems, are only different because of varying laws in different places and nothing more, or because of differences in traditional cultures in some regions. But in actual daily life, some of these noble people mentioned here are indeed still considered noble today. And some of the behaviors described here as not in accordance with the Dharma even today, those who act this way in every country, we could say, cannot be genuinely considered to possess the esteemed qualities of true nobility, nor can it be accurately perceived as embodying profound wisdom or insightful understanding. The four very important issues that we have indeed discussed earlier should be something we can reflect on. We can also observe and see this for ourselves. Today, as we continue our journey forward, as we mentioned last time, the subsequent discussion will primarily focus on the topic of economic ethics. Or, in the context of today's society, this also relates to a person's behavior or to wealth management, and certain specific concepts regarding some wealth. How should we understand this? Starting today, we will discuss this topic. At that time, the Buddha told Shansheng that there are 6 ways of conducting business that lead to the loss of wealth. The first is indulging in alcohol, being extremely addicted and obsessed with alcohol. Having a particular and intense fondness for drinking, this is indeed the very first one. The second is gambling, which is what we often refer to as gambling or games of chance. The third is heedlessness or carelessness. As for this heedlessness, different versions interpret it differently. Some versions say entering others' rooms at inappropriate times, entering someone else's room at an improper time, and in the Madhyama Agama it says seeking wealth at inappropriate times. Seeking wealth at improper times, some versions also refer to it as sexual misconduct. This interpretation also exists. Then the fourth is being obsessed with music and entertainment. That is, being excessively addicted to entertainment, such as singing, dancing, and other similar things. The fifth is associating with bad friends. In other words, it means keeping company with truly bad friends. The sixth behavior, which is indeed detrimental, is laziness and idleness. These 6 specific behaviors are actually things that significantly harm one's accumulated wealth and financial well-being. This can be accurately stated and understood in this manner, right? It is a common observation that many individuals in our contemporary world like to get rich and genuinely desire to increase their personal wealth and financial standing. But in the harsh reality of our daily lives, if we unfortunately engage in these specific 6 detrimental behaviors, not only will our accumulated wealth not increase as hoped or expected, it will actually experience a noticeable and significant decrease. Moreover, these particular 6 behaviors, there are actually 6 distinct and identifiable ways to damage one's personal reputation. This particular concept is quite remarkably similar to the profound and insightful content found within Nagarjuna Bodhisattva's letter to a friend.
Khenpo Sodargye Solarda Lelo Zhongen Tenpa Changdong Chanmur Zhongden Ji Zhagba Nianbi Jichigu.
There are different versions of the Nagarjuna's letter to a friend that mention engaging in some gambling activities and attending social gatherings and events, laziness associating with bad friends, drinking alcohol and entering the villages at night are the 6 ways to destroy one's reputation. We've already talked about this before, haven't we? One is gambling and another is attending gatherings. Then there is laziness and associating with bad friends. And then drinking alcohol and entering the villages at night. These 6 distinct behaviors basically correspond to precisely what is mentioned here in this context. You see, here it also talks about drinking alcohol, gambling, associating with bad friends, laziness, and idleness. If one indulges in entertainment and dancing, actually, this indulgence could refer to attending gatherings, you could say. If one is obsessed with singing and dancing, it might refer to the act of entering villages under the cover of night. This practice remains remarkably similar in the present day. At night, individuals frequently venture into villages, or they might visit various establishments such as bars, or even enter certain places that are considered impure or morally questionable. If one chooses to live in such a manner, it is indeed also considered a kind of improper conduct. So this particular point was already explicitly mentioned at that specific time. There are, in fact, 6 distinct behaviors that can significantly damage one's reputation, no matter what kind of individual you are. Even if you are a king, even if you are the esteemed ruler of a powerful nation, if a king frequently goes gambling and engages in such activities, if he habitually indulges in the consumption of alcohol or frequently goes to impure environments or consistently associates with negative companions, it is highly probable that all people will speak ill of them. Some of us might wonder, is this just a Buddhist saying? This is actually an ancient Indian teaching. But even today, in this era of highly advanced technology, isn't it still the same? Perhaps we can look at the entire vast world to find the definitive answer. When we carefully examine it with subtle wisdom and profound insight, we find that we are still very much the same even now. For example, not to mention a truly great king, even a mere county-level official or local leader, if he often goes out drinking, if he often gambles, if he frequently associates with shady people, if he often indulges himself, for example, by frequently going to watch singing and dancing shows, then everyone will certainly say, "Our leader goes gambling every day. He goes to the theater every day. He does this and that every day." So generally, even those truly noble individuals in today's world, such as highly respected teachers, distinguished scientists, or morally upright leaders, consistently refrain from becoming involved with such negative influences. In this regard, even just from a worldly perspective, without mentioning Buddhism, without talking about religion, not bringing up religion at all, let's just talk about the rules of the secular world for now then. It's the same in every country. For example, if the highest leader of a country goes out drinking every day, everyone will say, the president this country, prime minister this country, drinks every day, gambles, and is always hanging around with bad company every day. What this means is that such a person is undisciplined. Let alone managing the complex and intricate affairs of an entire country, they can't even manage their own personal family matters well. This crucial point, as I have just previously mentioned, whether it's the Buddha or Nagarjuna Bodhisattva, some of the fundamental ideas in Buddhism, if we carefully look at them today and truly consider them, still have a certain vitality and a certain significant degree of advancement is achieved. When we use modern thinking and observe with our current wisdom and present perspective, in reality, if we were to excel at practicing the 6 spiritual principles outlined here, it would. I recall an instance from my past where I had the opportunity to meet a particular leader, a person who could be regarded as a true statesman of our contemporary era. In my impression, this particular leader was exceptionally fond of continuous learning and possessed a truly remarkable level of inherent ability and skill, whether in the realm of politics or the domain of religion, and in many other aspects. But when I was chatting with him, he would often say to me, I absolutely do not drink any alcohol at all, ever. I actually don't really do this or that at all. Everything mentioned in Nagarjuna's letter to a friend, I just thought to myself, maybe you've never studied Nagarjuna Bodhisattva's letter to a friend, maybe you've never even read it, but as someone who is self-disciplined and self-aware, some of the specific behaviors described here, for example, can truly be achieved and fully realized. There's also a text known as the Sutra on the Deeds of a Bodhisattva. The Sutra on the Deeds of a Bodhisattva is an ancient and revered Indian scripture. It's a truly very good scripture and a set of profound teachings. I don't remember it very clearly. In it, there are also 5 distinct ways in which a king can ruin his kingdom. Among these 5 factors, the consumption of alcohol is notably included. In addition, a monarch who indulges in gambling, lusts after women, engages in hunting, disregards sound advice, and places no trust in the wise counsel of their loyal ministers will inevitably bring about the downfall of their own kingdom and forfeit control over the entire administration of the state. So, in this world we should, when there is a group of people expressing their opinions, when there is a collective voice, you might in the end up excessively praising entertainment and its various forms, or overly extolling the virtues of fine wine. If you carefully look at the world today, the compelling stories that are told best are often about the act of drinking and the experiences associated with it, including mautai and many other types of alcohol, which are among the highest consumed products in society. However, does this one point alone have the capacity to prove its correctness? Not necessarily. It is entirely plausible that certain entertainment activities simply draw a large number of spectators and participants who find them enjoyable. But just because many people are involved, does that mean it is right? Not necessarily. So in our contemporary society today, whether it's people's deeply held values or their fundamental ideological orientations, they all significantly differ. In different historical eras, there are always distinct and notable changes that occur. Therefore, whether we are devout Buddhists, or even if you don't truly possess a deep and abiding Buddhist faith, but you conscientiously take full and complete responsibility for your own life and seriously and thoroughly explore its profound meaning and ultimate purpose, or if you reflect on your own life sometimes in these kinds of scriptures, you will find much to consider. The principles discussed can be contemplated and reflected upon repeatedly. If you find them reasonable, you can accept them. If you don't find them reasonable, you can also let them go. There's nothing wrong with that either, but perhaps, in a certain sense, they are profoundly beneficial for one's overall well-being throughout their entire life. Following this, we will delve into the 6 phenomena, each of which is further comprised of 6 subordinate categories, making a total of 36 dharmas. We will now proceed to discuss these fundamental principles in detail. Next, it is said that the Buddha truly told Shansheng, if elders and all the noble sons of elders can understand the 4 types of bonding practices we discussed earlier, and also refrain from the 4 kinds of evil ways, and do not commit the 4 evil actions, and further understand the 6 ways of squandering wealth we just mentioned, then in this way, Shansheng, one can be free from the 4 places, that is, be liberated from the 4 evil destinies mentioned earlier, and attain liberation and freedom, and also make offerings to the 6 directions, because Shansheng was very interested in what the true and authentic 6-direction prostration in Buddhism actually is. He remained quite interested and deeply engaged in this particular teaching. So, the Buddha clearly explained and elucidated that the 4 kinds of evil ways you mentioned earlier, namely greed, anger, ignorance, and fear, are absent. And then, as we will discuss next, if one stays away from the 6 ways that damage one's reputation just mentioned, then this is actually equivalent to paying respect to the 6 directions. Whether we are paying homage to the Buddha or to the Bodhisattvas, or making offerings to the Bodhisattvas or Dharma protectors, in most cases it is truly and fundamentally about being a genuinely good and virtuous person. In this particular way, all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, as well as the Dakinis and Dharma protectors, will all be pleased. But if we behave in an extremely and truly bad way, no matter how you outwardly make offerings to the gods, the Sangha, or the Buddha, they will certainly not be pleased either. It's like when a house is extremely dirty. No matter how diligently you may try to invite some Dharma protectors or esteemed guests, they will all perceive that the place is simply too filthy, and consequently they will not come. This is also explained in the treatise on the modes of being. This is also a way of making offerings to the Dharma protectors, or a method of making offerings to the 6 directions. The 36 practices we discussed earlier, plus the 4 negative actions mentioned above, or you could say the 4 truly fundamental and very important concluding actions. If you avoid all of these, there are a total of 44 practices. If that's the case, when we talk about making offerings to the 6 directions in Buddhism, even if we don't make offerings to the Buddha or our teachers every day, we still strive to honor their profound wisdom and compassionate guidance. In fact, if you are simply a good person, then the Dharma protectors of virtue will always protect you. In this way, your present life will also be auspicious and positive, and your future lives will also be good. The foundation you lay in this life will be excellent, and the foundation for your next life will also be very good. Moreover, in our current present life and in this very present moment, many truly wise and insightful people will also wholeheartedly praise and commend you together. They'll say, oh, this person is really good. Actually, whether a person is considered good or bad, or their true character, is very often and frequently spoken of and determined by others in society. We Tibetans have a saying, when it comes to whether a person is good or bad, you can see it in the reputation they have among the people. But that's the only part I can say. The rest seems impossible to translate. Sometimes these sayings are a bit strange, so sometimes they just can't be translated. So when people praise you, this too. Although some of us may not particularly care about receiving others' praise or commendation, the praise and recognition from other people should still hold some significant meaning and considerable value. For example, let's consider this particular teacup. If many people genuinely say that its overall quality is very good, it clearly shows that its quality is indeed quite good. If everyone says its quality is poor and it doesn't keep things warm, and that drinking from it is bad for your health, this situation indicates that its inherent quality is very poor. Similarly, the same principle applies to human beings, as every single thing possesses its own inherent quality, and in the case of people, there exist differences in personal character. And when someone attains a certain result in this world, at the end of their life, when their body perishes and their life ends, they may be reborn as a human or in the heavenly realms, and experience very good and positive karmic rewards indeed. Of course, in some other versions, however, this particular part of the text is included in some versions of the scripture, but it is not present in others. Naturally, there are different versions circulating, especially within India. This diversity is also considered acceptable. This raises the question of whether we are referring to Anshigao's version or another variant, or the versions in the Madhyama Agama or Dirgha Agama. Some of the content in certain versions is still somewhat different. However, if we genuinely wish to thoroughly study and meticulously make comprehensive comparisons, we can effectively compare the various distinct versions available. If we do not have that kind of available time and just follow one particular version, it is also perfectly fine to understand it according to that specific version. I strongly believe that in India, at that particular time, there were many learned panditas, and what they recorded then, some versions are all different. For example, if a teacher gives a detailed lecture, and there are 2 very wise people, if they organize their work based on the recording, the final lecture notes they ultimately produce might not be exactly the same. There will inevitably be some noticeable differences in the content. Therefore, later Buddhist scriptures as well, because during the process of compilation, there might have been some discrepancies. You could put it that way. This is the general idea we discussed earlier. Next, we will elaborate on the 36 practices. First, the Buddha told Shansheng, "You should be aware that drinking alcohol has 6 significant and detrimental faults. The very first of these faults is the profound loss of wealth. People who habitually drink at first possess their own financial resources and assets, then gradually start borrowing money from others, and in the end, perhaps because people who truly love to drink aren't very stingy at all. After drinking just a little, they often become especially generous and open-hearted. Back then, actually, when we were studying, the schools weren't considered very good or well-equipped. Sometimes, surprisingly, even teachers would have students drink together, specifically to learn how to handle alcohol. And then, after gradually learning, there are two characteristics after drinking. One significant characteristic, among others, is generosity. At that time, none of us had any money, just 50 cents or a yuan, but we were especially generous. No problem, I'll just borrow some money now and buy another bottle. I'll pay it back slowly later, it's no big deal. Another thing is you tend to get bolder, even feeling the urge to fight. On one occasion, we were drinking at school, and at that time we were about to graduate from middle school. At that time, there was a teacher we were usually really afraid of, and he was far away. I thought to myself, if he comes over, I'll just beat him up hard. It's nothing. At that time, there really were a lot of bad thoughts. One was financial loss. Another was getting sick. The second issue was all kinds of illnesses. This is a particularly crucial point, as individuals with compromised liver function are strongly advised to abstain from the consumption of alcohol under any circumstances. The liver is responsible for detoxification. There are a lot of toxins in alcohol. After drinking, the liver ends up under a lot of pressure. Many doctors will ask, do you drink? If you don't, that's better. This is especially true for people with liver disease. It's not just the liver that is affected. Drinking alcohol extensively damages all the vital internal organs of the body. Even people who are usually quite healthy physically, if they love to drink, over time their health will deteriorate. It was a few years ago, quite a few years back in time. The United States actually possesses a very advanced medical system. However, every single year, a number of 88,000 people tragically die from drinking alcohol. That particular statistic was from several years ago indeed. I don't know about now. It's probably even more these days. Their healthcare system should be more advanced than those of many other countries. But in the end, the number of people who unfortunately die as a direct result of drinking alcohol is very high in every country and every region. It's really a large number. So, this should be considered a very dangerous and harmful beverage, but we probably don't really think so, especially in some social settings or places. If there's no alcohol present, people often feel they simply can't have a proper conversation, or indeed, can't talk at all. No banquet is complete without alcohol. There are a lot of song lyrics about this, and many toasts and proverbs about drinking. There are even some diamond words, special sayings. Using these, people boost their own confidence even more. But after you finish drinking, who knows what you end up becoming? Sakya Pandita said that the pleasure of drinking alcohol is actually just a kind of mental madness, an attachment mistaken for happiness. And in fact, that's probably true, certainly. When you're sober and normal, your mind isn't really happy. But when you drink until you're completely drunk, you feel, wow, incredibly happy. The entire world now seems hazy and quite unreal, as if you have truly reached the profound state of Dzogchen. However, this is actually very problematic. Thirdly, conflict is a significant and truly important issue. As for conflict, everyone knows that after drinking, the other day, a leader said, he came to me to quit drinking. He said, I've done many things in life I'm deeply ashamed of. If I don't quit today, I'm going to be finished very, very soon. Just the other day, the day before yesterday, when I was having dinner with some prominent leaders and many other important individuals, I got into a fight with someone right at the dinner table. As a direct result, because I was completely drunk, I ended up collapsing down on the ground. Someone then gave me a really severe beating. So when it truly comes to drinking, you might have the mindset to fight, but not the ability. Then your bad reputation spreads far and wide, because when you're drunk, you display all sorts of ugly behaviors. In the very end, there are truly so many faults. Just like in the treatise on the perfection of great wisdom, it is clearly stated, you can refer to it when you have time. There are indeed 35 distinct kinds of faults. You will often waste your valuable wealth, frequently get sick, and regrettably become addicted to gambling. And also things like being naked in public, having no sense of shame, and so on. It talks about many, many such things. Then, the fifth point is that anger and irritability naturally arise. Generally, people who drink have a very strong tendency toward anger. It doesn't take much. Even a slightly inappropriate remark can immediately lead to a serious fight or confrontation. Even a minor disagreement can instantly trigger an outburst or emotional reaction. This situation is also frequently observed and is indeed the case in many families. In some families, for example, if the father has a strong tendency to drink alcohol, every single time he comes home late at night, he beats his wife and children. Many individuals frequently leave a very poor impression on others throughout their lives, a fact that is widely known. Furthermore, the act of consuming alcohol leads to a gradual decline in one's wisdom, as it directly stimulates and adversely affects our brain. After that, one's memory capabilities tend to get progressively worse and worse. A person's cognitive intelligence slowly and gradually fades away over time. Both IQ and EQ are affected to some extent, quite significantly. Although in this world, many people do truly praise and indeed glorify it, whether it's through various other advertisements or within different distinct groups, many people probably praise drinking, however, if we truly take a moment to carefully examine and deeply consider the comprehensive benefits and potential harms that it brings to our bodies and overall well-being. Are there actually any benefits? In fact, there is a lot of harm. Some people say, it's fine, just drink a little red wine. It can lead to a cheerful disposition, robust physical health, and the smooth flow of energy throughout the meridians. Some proponents will indeed speak of all these so-called benefits. The reality is not so straightforward. In an objective evaluation of its pros and cons, it's clear that the disadvantages demonstrably outweigh the advantages. In the treatise on the perfection of great wisdom, it is also stated, the benefits to the body are very few, while the harm is great. The benefits to the body are extremely minimal, while the harm caused is indeed very, very significant and far-reaching. So, there may be some fleeting feelings of pleasure or temporary gratification it brings us, or perhaps it genuinely makes it considerably easier to engage in conversations and connect with others in certain social situations, or allows you to truly express and articulate things you genuinely want to say, things you can fully express at that very moment, which you normally can't express after drinking. You can express them more easily, right? What I'm drinking is tea, not alcohol. What's so funny? What's there to laugh about me drinking tea? So in reality, drinking alcohol still has many faults. Some of us might indeed think that the feeling it brings is very much pleasurable. But on this very significant point, the Sutra on the Sacred Foundations of Mindfulness indeed also explicitly states and elaborates those individuals who consume alcoholic beverages primarily crave its delicious and enjoyable taste. People who regularly consume alcoholic beverages are often simply attached to its distinctive and enjoyable flavor, not considering the bitter consequences, not thinking about the painful outcomes. I think this is very well put. People who drink alcohol often feel that it's a wonderful kind of enjoyment, but in reality they don't consider its bitter consequences. Many people, after drinking, end up possibly losing their sense of shame. They lose the ability to control their speech. Even things that were supposed to be kept secret, or get exposed to various things. Some individuals may even frequently vomit or experience diarrhea and so on. A significant number of embarrassing behaviors start to appear because of this situation. Therefore, as devoted Buddhists, we should always strive our utmost not to consume any alcoholic beverages. I've heard that some dedicated Buddhist lay practitioners who are very committed to helping all sentient beings have made significant efforts in this regard, and also consider themselves to be very good people, still often drink during social gatherings, and continue to drink frequently. If even this precept is not kept, then it's likely that the other 3 refuges and 5 precepts can't be upheld either. The Buddha also said in the Ekottara Agama, there is one fundamental and absolutely crucial rule that must be strictly observed at all times. If you truly uphold this rule, then all of the Buddha's teachings can be truly upheld. What is this rule, not drinking alcohol? If you look at the Ekottara Agama, it is also explained very clearly. In the Vinaya of the Sarvastivada school in the past, a scriptural proof from a Buddhist sutra was also cited. It says that if a person drinks even a drop of alcohol the size of a grass tip, such a Buddhist, he is certainly not my disciple, and I am absolutely not his teacher. This profound teaching is also prominently found in some of our revered Tibetan traditions. I have also personally seen it translated and documented in the Han Buddhist text, A Grove of Pearls in the Garden of the Dharma. At that time, the Buddha told the monks, saying, "If you claim to be my disciple, you must not drink alcohol. If you are my disciple, you cannot drink alcohol. Even a single drop on the tip of a blade of grass must not be consumed. Even alcohol that clings to a single blade of grass must not be drunk." We say not to touch even a drop of alcohol, not even a single drop. This is what it means to be a true Buddhist. So when it comes to others, we have no right to tell them whether they should drink or not. There's really nothing to say about that. But as a Buddhist, especially one who has taken the 3 refuges and the 5 precepts, and has diligently studied the Dharma for many years, and is actively practicing the essential preliminary practices. If, despite this dedication, you still continue to regularly consume alcoholic beverages, it may significantly affect your own physical and mental health. It also brings many, many disadvantages to our entire spiritual practice. It brings a lot of disadvantages. Although in Vajrayana Buddhism, sometimes we truly rely on drinking alcohol and consuming meat to enhance our spiritual realization, there are indeed such cases, and these practices are part of certain traditions. But in such situations, it is extremely rare, indeed very uncommon. Only those individuals who have attained a certain level of realization themselves can directly transform alcohol and meat into a means for the path. But generally speaking, this is not so easy. So when we practice ourselves, we should still maintain pure conduct when practicing the Dharma. This is extremely, extremely important. Especially as the Buddha just stated, even the very tip of a delicate blade of grass should not be tainted or harmed. This profound principle is precisely what is truly and authentically taught within the sacred Buddhist scriptures. Of course, in this entire process, some individuals may often mention and bring up various points, that in Vajrayana, alcohol and meat are used during offerings, and that we also use alcohol and meat when making offerings to Dharma protectors. There are indeed such cases that exist, but these are, just as Rongzom Pandita clearly explained, they are merely objects of dependent origination. It does not mean that one must offer alcohol or that one must drink alcohol. That is not the intended meaning here. If we ourselves cannot truly transform it into a means for the path, it is better to be a bit more cautious, especially when we are making offerings to Dharma protectors. Some Buddhists, even to this day, do not fully understand this. If you do not understand in such situations, you can certainly use tea or various other suitable beverages as a perfectly acceptable substitute. That is indeed entirely acceptable and widely practiced. Otherwise, in certain specific places, such as among some dedicated Vajrayana practitioners, particularly in regions like Tibet or the serene and spiritual kingdom of Bhutan, among these devoted followers, because from a very young age, in their profound understanding, they have been taught offering alcohol to Dharma protectors is considered very pure, so they do not develop wrong views. However, in groups where wrong views may potentially arise, it is important that we need to be careful. There is another point I want to emphasize. Nowadays, even when making offerings to Dharma protectors at Larung, some Dharma friends often offer biscuits and sweet candy and delightful treats. All sorts of things like that, just carelessly thrown around everywhere. A lot of it gets tossed onto other people's roofs. This affects the overall beautification of our environment. Many aspects are negatively impacted by this. So from now on, I hope that all of you, of course, making offerings to Dharma protectors is very good, but when making these offerings, it's best to handle the offerings properly yourself. Place them in a clean container and then completely cover it up. After fully covering it, wait for a few days. Then you can personally take it to a relatively clean place. If you carefully pour it out in a clean natural forest or on some clean green grass, then some local birds can safely eat it, and that is perfectly fine. This applies in cities as well. In the city, some Buddhists casually make offerings at their windows and then throw things out there, while others throw things all over the rooftops, creating a widespread scattering. This is unreasonable. The present era is different from the past. In the past, there were grasslands everywhere in Tibet, but now things are not the same. Especially here at Larungar, it seems that there are many people here who especially like to make offerings to Dharma protectors. But they don't pay attention to the offerings and just do it carelessly, sometimes even during our group offering rituals. However, some others have their various opinions and comments regarding the subject. If we don't handle these things very properly, some of all the offerings are thrown out together with the plastic bags. Then when they're thrown out, some yaks end up eating the plastic bags along with the offerings. After consuming them, the yaks have tragically even died as a direct result. So, while making offerings to the revered Dharma protectors may indeed bring you significant merit, the act of killing yaks, even indirectly, also inevitably brings you considerable faults. This includes our current collective Dharma protector altar, where sometimes there are many yaks gathered around, creating quite a scene. Some yaks diligently keep licking the alcohol offerings, a curious sight, and eventually they get incredibly drunk. When many yaks become heavily intoxicated, they begin to act just like human drunkards, and then they start behaving quite wildly and uncontrollably. So you all need to be careful when passing by. Otherwise, these yaks will have consumed a substantial amount of that liquid, and when they are in a less than pleasant mood, they certainly won't be inclined to be polite or courteous towards you. This situation is quite comparable to the monk I made reference to just yesterday, who was ultimately gored to death by a yak's horns. That was quite an unfortunate situation, so you should always be very careful and vigilant. As for the alcohol I'm talking about, on one hand, it's considered very good and highly beneficial, precisely because it serves as a sacred and respectful offering to the Dharma protectors. However, despite its positive aspects, if we are not extremely careful and mindful, it can potentially cause others to develop incorrect views and negatively affect their lives, which truly isn't good. Especially for some Buddhist practitioners in the Han regions, we really need to pay attention to our behavior in many aspects. Don't make things too obvious. Whatever offerings we do make, we tend to be especially enthusiastic at those particular times. But when it comes to study and contemplation, it's not quite the same, though that's okay too. Overall, at the present moment, we can confidently say that our motivation for study and contemplation is still quite good in various places. And this is what I have to say about the faults of drinking alcohol. In other words, if you consume alcohol, these issues will certainly arise. Everyone should have a truly shared understanding of this important matter. The Buddha explicitly told Shansheng that if elders and their sons continue to keep drinking alcohol, if they persist in drinking frequently, then their families' accumulated wealth and financial stability will inevitably decrease day by day. If someone is especially fond of drinking, then gradually and over time, in the end, they may potentially lose absolutely everything they possess. Some people are indeed very pitiable because of this, including some of the many homeless people who are currently living on the streets nowadays. They are actually very pitiable as well. If you were to give them some food, they don't really like to readily accept it in any way at all, you see. You have to give them money, and after giving them money, they will go to a bar and insist on buying alcohol. In the end, they get themselves completely drunk and muddled. Then, after a period of time, they inevitably go back to wandering the streets again. So, among all kinds of different people in today's diverse society, they also inherently have their own unique and distinct ways of living and existing. On one hand, it is absolutely essential that we should respect that. We should respect all forms of life in this world. But on the other hand, we also know what kind of lives do different people actually lead, and in what ways do different people choose to live their lives. As for myself, am I truly a Buddhist? Am I truly someone in this world who is supposed to have some reputation, someone with a certain status? If that's indeed the case, then even though the overall trend of society is like this, when it comes to my own personal health and my own genuine interests, what is good and what is not good, this is something that deserves careful consideration and choice. Next, let's discuss in more detail the second of the 6 fundamental principles. The Buddha explained to Shansheng that engaging in gambling also inherently carries with it 6 distinct kinds of faults. So, what exactly are these specific 6 faults that we should be aware of? Gambling is the same way. The very first consequence is the daily loss of wealth. We all know that people who gamble, if they used to have money, they would often go to the casino to gamble. In the end, their wealth is depleted day by day, and they may end up with nothing, losing everything, their family ruined, and their lives destroyed. There are many people like this. Everyone should be aware of this. As for the second important point, even if you happen to win while gambling with others, you will still face significant consequences. It will inevitably later lead to endless cycles of revenge. You end up with relationships like those between enemies, and there's nothing you can do about it. Because today you have truly made someone else lose, and you have indeed won, and that is a significant achievement. They will still hold a grudge in their heart. So this kind of deep-seated resentment can never truly be resolved. The third significant point is being reproached by the wise. All wise people often rebuke this behavior. Not only do our Dharma protectors, but even the saints criticize it. Even the most wise and knowledgeable people in our world, just as I mentioned earlier, everyone will say things like, that person from their family is always gambling. They will judge what kind of person he is. We can observe this clearly within our contemporary society as well. Fourth, people will not show him due respect, nor will they trust him. For example, if he wants to borrow money, people will often say, oh, please don't lend him any money. Otherwise, he will just gamble every single day. No one would ever do that. So back at our school, there was a particular situation where there was a teacher who cried very badly every day. In the end, I felt a bit of pity for her at the time, so I actually lent her a little bit of money. I believe it was back then at that particular time. Later, even the other teachers at our school couldn't do anything about it. She would say every day, I'll pay you back in a couple of days, But in the end, there was really nothing we could do, and she ended up lying. It seems she still hasn't paid it back even now. You just can't trust people who love to gamble. This person wasn't from our school, but our school, together with people from another school, looked for teachers from our school. When this particular teacher introduced her to me at that specific time, I also genuinely thought she was very pitiful. She was a woman, and the school was unfortunately about to fire her. I felt a bit truly sorry for her. But later, it seemed that wasn't really the actual case. My entire mindset back then was completely and utterly different. So in this particular world, sometimes when it genuinely comes to the act of gambling, even though gambling in today's modern world is often perceived in various ways, it is legal in some countries and illegal in many other places. In some places, like the vibrant city of Las Vegas in the United States, which is widely considered to be probably the largest casino destination in the entire world, even including Macau, but as for these specific places, they consistently treat it as a significant and thriving industry. Their annual revenue is in the many trillions of US dollars. That's precisely the kind of thing it truly is, indeed. But in reality, even so, can it truly and genuinely bring us health and significant benefit? Not necessarily. So sometimes people's behavior can indeed be ridiculous and even illogical. Some countries consider it legal, while in others it is illegal. This phenomenon still exists today. Now, the fifth point is that one becomes increasingly distant from their friends and family. The people connected to them start to ignore them more and more. The sixth point is that a person who engages in gambling will constantly cultivate a larceny-driven mindset, which ultimately gives rise to a destructive propensity for violent robbery and a relentless stream of numerous other malicious intentions. Previously, I believe this was indeed mentioned in the Vinaya. It was probably specifically found in the collection of anomalous stories from the Sutras and Vinaya, a compilation of various Buddhist stories and teachings. Within this text, there is a compelling story about a particular family. The father of this family had 2 sons. One son was quite obedient and always listened to his parents. He went out to earn money and did very well in his business ventures. As for the other son, he was quite different. If you gave him 2 million in gold, he would immediately gamble it all away. After losing it all, he would come back after losing even more. Then the father would give him another 2 million, and he would lose it again, and then the father would give him another 2 million. Altogether, he gave him 6 million in gold. But in the end, it was all lost. After losing everything, the father had no choice and stopped giving him more. Later, this son eventually went to live elsewhere in another place and fell in with bad company. After some time had passed, he gradually developed truly malicious intentions. He then told his friend, "Please go to my house." He said, "My father has valuable gold and silver treasures hidden in a certain secret place at home." He told him precisely what to do, and in the end he even wanted to kill his own father. He sent someone, ultimately intending to kill his own father as well. So when it comes to the significant problems and challenges caused by excessive gambling, whether it's observed throughout history or in our current everyday real life and society, there are actually a lot of such cases. I don't know what the situation is like in many of your places. However, where we are from, merely mentioning the concept of gambling makes everyone become very much afraid. Just a few years ago, in our quiet village, there were also many, not big casinos, but quite a few small ones. Now, in Tibetan areas, this is everywhere. Every village has some places for gambling. And when it comes to gambling, some people, when they first start gambling, those people are very clever. They let him keep winning money. For example, today he gambles once and wins 20 or 30,000 yuan. Then a great many people start to find it especially attractive. They truly think, I did absolutely nothing and easily got 20 or 30,000, and maybe tomorrow it could be 40 or 50,000 yuan. Wow, a lot of people are really envious. So they desperately borrow money and go gamble. But after a while, all of it is gone. A fellow villager, also a relative, just kept gambling and gambling. At first, he made some money. He was really happy, drinking and borrowing money. But in the end, he suddenly lost more than 200,000 yuan. For his family, there was no way they could possibly handle that. Eventually, he went completely crazy. After that, no matter where he went, he would always talk about gambling, winning money, and losing money. He just kept talking about it all the time. So in our contemporary world, it is quite evident that there really are a significant number of these particular kinds of behaviors that we frequently observe. So how should we actually choose or avoid these behaviors? Let's use our own inherent wisdom to carefully observe this. These 6 distinct types of actions, the Buddha explicitly told Shansheng, are indeed called the 6 losses of gambling. If the son of a noble family or the nobleman himself keeps on gambling incessantly and without restraint, his family's valuable property and thriving business will inevitably and progressively decrease day by day, leading to significant financial ruin and hardship. So in this crucial regard, I also want to earnestly remind us, Buddhists, logically and profoundly speaking, those individuals who truly and deeply like gambling. There probably shouldn't be any among us, given the current circumstances. However, we should still pay careful attention to this particular kind of concerning behavior. If we are not sufficiently careful and vigilant, even in this modern day and age, it's still considered very rare. A significant number of people possess a kind of, how should I articulate it, a very challenging to define era. During this entire process, there might be certain situations, but sometimes we might also compare ourselves, like, today I made a bet with someone. This doesn't count as gambling, right? We made a bet and in the end I lost 16 yuan. This isn't considered gambling, is it? I said I was right about this matter. They said I was wrong. And in the end, after discussing it, sometimes we have situations like this, but these don't really count as gambling. True gambling, however, is still very much about the inherent desire to either win or to lose. When I do win, I absolutely have to truly enjoy it. Actually, sometimes the stock market is very much like this too. You might gain a significant amount yourself, while other individuals might not acquire anything at all. When you experience a gain, you feel especially happy and content. When you don't, you feel truly sad and disheartened. Of course, playing the stock market isn't exactly called gambling either. But in reality, however, in our current modern everyday world, this kind of behavior in gambling venues, the desire to win or lose, is extremely intense. As Buddhists, we should diligently calm this restless mindset. There is a profound passage in the ancient and revered the Sutra on the collection of 100 karmic stories that thoughtfully says, if you lose, you feel anxiety and fear. If you win, you feel joy and celebration. If we typically feel fear when we experience failure and profound joy when we achieve success, but if one can truly let go of the attachment to both winning and losing, that is indeed the greatest and most supreme happiness. If we can genuinely treat both winning and losing with an equally balanced and serene mind, then that should be the greatest happiness in the world. Next, let's talk about the 6 distinct ways of debauchery, which are quite significant and noteworthy to consider. Debauchery, according to the Vinaya, actually refers to sexual misconduct. In this particular context, debauchery specifically means, as Mipham Rinpoche explained in the treatise on the modes of being, he spoke at length about the faults of indulgence. Debauchery and indulgence basically mean the same thing, because this person is too debauched. They have no restraint, no self-discipline at all. This is what debauchery is. There is no evil they won't commit. They have no self-control over anything at all. They lack right awareness and mindfulness. Such behavior is also something that should be restrained here, as it leads to 6 kinds of faults. The first is that a particularly debauched person does not protect themselves and does not take care of their own body. A person who is especially debauched or engages in sexual misconduct may contract AIDS or catch many infectious diseases. They don't even have the awareness to protect their own body, let alone others. They don't even care about themselves. They have no sense of self-protection for their own body. The second is not protecting one's wealth. As for those who are especially debauched, they may not adequately safeguard their valuable property and ultimately end up carelessly wasting it, or they don't truly cherish their personal possessions and may even resort to borrowing money from others. They might even completely use up all of their parents' hard-earned money. Just like some so-called neets, they tend to spend absolutely everything their parents have accumulated. But they don't care at all. It doesn't matter to them. This is how such debauched people are. Then the third is not protecting one's children. People who are especially debauched like this don't even protect their own dear sons or their own wives at all, or they are not filial to their parents, or they don't care about their own children, friends, or relatives at all. Some people really are like this. They don't care about anything. They can't even manage their own lives. So how could they possibly take care of their children or family? There's no way they could handle these things. It's just impossible for these people. The fourth characteristic is being frequently anxious and perpetually fearful. Such individuals are often found in a persistent state of constant worry and profound unease, always dreading potential gains and fearing inevitable losses. They are consistently filled with an overwhelming sense of apprehension, deep-seated fear, and pervasive depression, because they are especially dissolute. When they indulge themselves, in the end, they feel no sense of security. They often suffer from a profound kind of panic disorder themselves. Fifth, all sorts of suffering and pervasive evil constantly entangle them. Because they commit all manner of evil deeds, there are indeed many, many negative and undesirable consequences. These negative consequences are always clinging to their bodies. We all know that people who are especially dissolute, some people, because they are particularly dissolute, might go to impure places and do all kinds of truly bad things, including theft or even serious robbery and other illicit activities, or often engage in actions that are not in strict accordance with the established laws and regulations. They frequently find themselves in a perpetual state of having no personal freedom or autonomy. They even very frequently end up embroiled in complex legal lawsuits. Some truly evil people, because they have done far too many profoundly bad things. In the end, a truly significant amount of misfortune unfortunately befalls them. There is an especially and remarkably large amount of it indeed. As a consequence of committing an excessive number of misdeeds, some individuals may ultimately find themselves consigned to incarceration. Yet, for those who manage to avoid confinement within a prison, they are nevertheless consistently and perpetually afflicted by a malevolent fate that clings to them relentlessly. Sometimes I think some of our monastics and Dharma friends here, if they practice hearing, contemplation, and meditation in purity, I feel they are truly very happy. This includes some of our Buddhist practitioners, because their body and mind are relatively pure, and they don't have so many messy worldly affairs. There are many complicated things in the world, which on the surface may not be obvious, but in reality such a life is very chaotic. If one's life is especially chaotic, constantly getting involved in this and that, in the end you end up with a lot of stress and suffering yourself. This can lead to significant emotional and mental burdens. There's no way out. You can't just leave things unresolved, but trying to resolve them is also very difficult. So sometimes some pure practitioners, for some pure Buddhist followers, if they genuinely rely on their own inherent ability to live a truly pure and virtuous life, they should find their existence relatively easy and genuinely happy. That should indeed be a very good and positive thing. But those who are careless and indulgent are not like this. Sixth, delighting in falsehoods. They especially enjoy and eagerly hope to engage in actions and behaviors that are fundamentally fake, misleading, and profoundly deceptive. They actively seek to deceive others through various means, or they frequently employ highly exaggerated and misleading language in their communications and engage hypocritical actions. Such behavior is particularly insincere and demonstrably unreliable. There are all kinds of falsehoods and deceptive elements involved. When we observe people who are especially dissolute, you can tell just by the way they speak. You can see it, you can hear it, that this person is not genuine. He is extremely dissolute, and in society he is someone who completely and utterly lacks proper right view and understanding. You can tell what kind of person this is just by listening to them. These are indeed the 6 faults that are typically caused by excessive indulgence. If the elders and the sons of elders continue to behave in such an utterly unrestrained and excessively indulgent way, then what will become of our society? If you keep acting like this in your conduct, if you continue to live without any self-restraint whatsoever, constantly indulging yourself in such a manner, then your family's accumulated wealth will inevitably diminish day by day and night by night. Ultimately, there will be no favorable or positive outcome for you. This is also mentioned in the collection of anomalous stories from the Sutras and Vinaya. It says, "There once was a family with 3 sons. Initially, these 3 sons were especially disappointing, consistently failing to meet expectations and causing their parents considerable worry. They were lustful, addicted to alcohol, and particularly fond of hunting. They committed all kinds of evil deeds in the world, leaving nothing bad undone. Later, their father earnestly advised them not to behave this way. But he simply couldn't stop them at all. Eventually, the father came up with an idea. He gave them property, but not money. In the end, their behavior had to be brought under control. Later, when their father asked them about it, they simply said, 'It, because of bad friends.' It's like being in a pigsty, unable to taste anything delicious. We really have absolutely no way to do good deeds. So now we have no other choice but to act in this particular way." Then the father said, "If you truly let go of your past mistakes, I won't hold them against you. If you live a pure and clean life from now on, I can give you money. If you take sincere refuge in the sacred 3 jewels, I will generously give you 30 million in pure gold. Furthermore, if you truly accept and uphold the 5 precepts, I will provide you with 50 million in precious gold. Would you be willing to do this? If you are, I'll take you to see the Buddha." They agreed. Later they had money again and also took refuge in the 3 jewels and accepted the 5 precepts. Their behavior changed for the better. They turned over a new leaf. Actually, some of us are really like this too. Perhaps in real life, some individuals are actually influenced by truly and genuinely bad friends. Some are influenced by their environment. A few years ago, while I was living in the United Kingdom, I had the distinct opportunity to meet a Tibetan Buddhist monk. He said that at the very beginning, back in the early 1970s, they were indeed hippies. At that particular time, they did all sorts of truly bad and mischievous things. They said that over there, they often engaged in all kinds of especially egregious and profoundly negative behaviors. But at that particular time, there was absolutely nothing they could effectively do. It was only after they encountered and truly connected with some exceptionally good teachers that their hearts genuinely returned, as if they were returning to their own comfortable and familiar home. When they thoughtfully reflected on themselves once again, they felt as if they had been completely and utterly truly crazy before. Their lives had absolutely no quality at all, but at that particular time, they still truly thought that this kind of behavior was very interesting indeed. Day and night they were howling and acting wildly, doing all sorts of things in the very midst of it. Later, it was as if their minds had completely and utterly calmed down. From that point on, they were truly able to practice well, and after diligently practicing, the positive results were also very, very good. For some people, if they had done a lot of bad things in the past, they had already experienced everything they needed to experience. In the end, it seemed like there were no regrets left. Looking back, they realized, wow, none of that had any real meaning. So if you truly study Buddhism, if you truly practice, just like those sons mentioned earlier, in the end, you still should feel as if you have already tasted all the flavors of the world, sour, sweet, bitter, and spicy. After tasting them, they realize, oh, these are not true happiness. True happiness is still the profound and genuine happiness that resides deeply within the heart. This is especially true for some of our teenagers nowadays who, at the initial stages, might frequently experience conflicts with their parents. After clashing with their parents, they go out searching for themselves, wandering the streets. Then, after coming into contact with people in society, in the end, they become open to anything. For example, drug use, drinking alcohol, and inhaling laughing gas. Now, abroad, there are even things that look just like balloons. As they keep inhaling, eventually they become addicted. Once addicted, their whole body and mind become uncontrollable. Some international students often throw parties. At these parties, there are all sorts of interesting things. Some things truly look like delicious candy, rich chocolate, or various other tempting snacks. But after hearing about it, it turns out that after enjoying them, gradually the whole person falls into a kind of hallucinatory state. In the end, many of their actions become uncontrollable. So in today's world, there must be many seeds of indulgence. This includes illicit drugs, certain challenging environments, and even negative influences from bad friends. These are becoming more and more common in our society. But in the end, these fleeting things might completely drain all your accumulated wealth, exhaust your vital energy, and utterly waste your precious youth, and ultimately deplete all your inherent wisdom. In the end, after all that has transpired and been observed, it's truly and profoundly pitiful to witness such a state of affairs. Sometimes we often see some people around us, especially in the Western world. You might observe someone diligently pushing a rather old and somewhat worn tricycle, laden with their various bottles and a thick, perhaps well-used blanket carefully covering them on top, as they make their way along the street. I've heard that this particular individual used to be quite famous indeed in their time, but later, for various different reasons, some individuals suffered significant mental trauma, and some developed deep resentment towards society, harboring a great deal of hatred towards society and resentment toward their own families. The most crucial thing is that nowadays, some people among us, this is caused by movies and TV shows, so everyone really needs to pay attention to this. For example, this is also the case in Han regions. I'm not sure if it's the same in the West. There's a saying between parents and children in Han regions that caused them a profound and lasting amount of harm at that critical time. From that moment on, with their own parents or their closest and most cherished loved ones, they tragically became complete and bitter enemies filled with an overwhelming and deep-seated resentment. The primary reason for this phenomenon is actually partly due to some of today's pervasive media influences. Logically speaking, for example, between me and my parents, perhaps my parents might say to me, "I do not trust you at all," or "Get out of here immediately," a particularly hurtful and impactful remark, and that sentence is remembered forever. From that point on, the fundamental relationship between parents or other family members is completely ruined. Actually, this is indeed the biggest and most significant problem we face nowadays. Logically speaking, we truly do not fully comprehend this complex situation. It seems that in Tibetan areas, this doesn't really actually happen. Even if parents say the most harsh, very dreadful things to their own children, they might say it in a moment of anger. But afterwards, after all, they are still my parents. I would never hold a grudge. But people nowadays aren't like that. So now, in some of the TV shows and movies we see, this is done in order to attract viewers very much during their performances. Because of that one sentence earlier, it seems like the relationship between the two of them is forever changed to be like that. And that's what they need for the story. But our everyday lives are not a dramatic movie. We should certainly have a significant bit of self-control. Otherwise, some of us, parents and children, including teacher-student relationships, will face difficulties. And relationships between spouses, if we completely act according to the behaviors shown in television dramas and movies, I think that's extremely foolish. Because of that one sentence, you remember it forever. And from then on, for example, between a mother and daughter, because the mother said something to you, and that particular sentence truly hurt her deeply and profoundly from that moment onwards, the significant barrier between you, even when the mother is finally being laid to rest and peacefully departed, you would still, unfortunately, possess that very same unyielding attitude. This is a very harsh reality in real life. This is something that, as Buddhists, we need to pay even more attention to. Originally, I wanted to finish talking about all 6 methods. Today, I covered so much. I wanted to go through all 6 different methods, but it seems that's not really possible at this present moment. So let's just talk about these 2 methods. There's really no need to rush at all, right? Originally, my intention and plan were to meticulously complete every single task and address all outstanding matters within the confines of this particular session. However, some aspects will inevitably remain unfinished for now. All right, it's okay if I can't finish.
Kirgana jirano chupai chupun zonen droa droa
Bandangara Badna Sodargye Bandangara Badna Sodargye Khenpo Sodargye-The Buddha